It was supposed to be a routine transport. A three-locomotive military convoy carrying classified cargo, personnel, and sealed crates was scheduled to depart from a remote installation near Fort Harrison, Montana, on the morning of August 13, 1953. Its destination was officially listed as Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. The route, spanning hundreds of miles through open prairie, pine-covered ridges, and isolated mountain passes, was chosen for security and discretion. Radio silence was mandated. No stops were authorized. The train departed at 4:30 a.m. It never arrived. At 8:12 p.m., military logistics in New Mexico reported a missing status. The train had passed its last checkpoint, near Big Timber, Montana, just after noon. Then, nothing. No derailment was recorded. No emergency transmissions, just a complete and sudden vanishing act. Publicly, the incident never existed. But recently, declassified fragments, eyewitness accounts, and private testimonies gathered over decades have hinted at a chilling reality, one buried under layers of Cold War secrecy, scrubbed logs, and a string of accidental deaths. The cargo manifest, now heavily redacted, refers to biological packages, reactive materials, and a container marked only with a handwritten phrase, "Do not open outside secure perimeter." Rumors swirl of strange phenomena days before the disappearance. A retired signal operator in Idaho Falls recalls detecting non-terrestrial interference along the planned route, high-frequency bursts followed by silent dead zones. Locals in Red Lodge, Montana, reported seeing lights moving against the wind and hearing low-frequency hums in the hills the night before the train passed through. There's the case of John McMillan, a forest ranger who claims to have seen the convoy from a ridgeline east of Billings. "I saw the train. It was long, military gray, but the rear cars didn't look right. They shimmered like heat mirage. And the sound, there was none. It moved like it was gliding, not rolling." Days later, McMillan was hospitalized with what was described as temporary neurological disassociation. His family never spoke publicly again. The official military statement, released 4 months later, tersely described the disappearance as a likely result of track failure and weather conditions. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies, no freight. Just one loose coupling bolt discovered near a decommissioned tunnel in the Crazy Mountains, sealed off the next week with no explanation. The tunnel's coordinates were quietly removed from all public USGS maps. As the years passed, the incident faded into the margins of whispered history, kept alive only in conspiracy forums, basement-dwelling radio broadcasts, and old newspaper microfilm reels. A 1961 internal NSA memo labeled the case as unsolvable due to dimensional instability. The document, recovered during a FOIA release, was quickly retracted and removed from public archives. But in 1994, a photograph surfaced, allegedly taken by a hiker near the Wyoming border. It showed a military-style freight car, half buried in the woods, marked with the exact convoy code, PX-107. The image was dismissed as doctored. The hiker went missing 2 weeks later. This is not just a missing train. It is a symbol of secrecy, fear, and something perhaps not of this world. Something moved that night across the American wilderness, and it left behind nothing but silence. And in that silence, a question echoes. Where did PX-107 go, and what was it carrying? The investigation began before the public even knew anything had gone wrong. Less than 4 hours after the missed arrival, a 6-person recovery team was deployed from Los Alamos under the code name Operation Quill. Their orders were classified even from other military branches. The team included 2 logistics officers, 1 radio technician, a chemical weapons analyst, a CIA liaison, and a specialist from an unnamed division. Her name was redacted in every known document, but a marginalia note on one retrieved logbook refers to her as Dr. K. This group would never officially return. By dawn the following day, military outposts across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas were issued Level 3 alert protocols, masked publicly as a training readiness drill. Residents of towns along the train's route reported black helicopters and unmarked trucks. A farmer outside Livingston, Montana, swore that his cattle were tagged overnight with fluorescent markers. He was found dead in his barn a week later. His cause of death listed as accidental organ failure, a term never used in standard coroner's reports. The first known anomaly came from the abandoned telegraph station at Elkhorn, a facility shut down in 1946 but briefly reactivated by the team. Logs recovered from a private estate in 1989 show that at 3:44 on August 14th, the operator received a sequence of dashes and pulses. When translated, the message read, "Observe the shadow, stop the motion, repeat frequency 114.2. This frequency, 114.2 megahertz, does not correspond to any commercial or military broadcast channel. However, it matches one of the unused bands registered during Project Mercury's early telemetry experiments years later. Some claim the connection is coincidental. Others suggest the train was carrying early prototype equipment tied to temporal communication, or something far stranger. Throughout the week following the train's disappearance, 3 separate forest fires broke out along the potential route corridor. None were officially linked to the incident, yet all began near remote track junctions with limited access. Satellite photos from a now-defunct Air Force surveillance balloon, declassified in 2003, show irregular heat signatures shaped like concentric circles centered around Tunnel 17, an old freight tunnel built during World War I and abandoned due to structural instability. It was at this tunnel that Operation Quill's final known transmission originated. The message was brief, cut with static, and later transcribed by a civilian ham operator from Miles City who picked up the signal by accident. The voice, female, calm, and heavily distorted, simply said, "We see movement through the veil. There is no track." Repeating, "There is no track. There is no track." That operator, Albert Jennings, attempted to contact the military about his recording. Within 2 days, his home was raided by federal agents under suspicion of unauthorized signal interference. His tapes were seized. He would later tell his son that one of the men in the raid wore a patch he didn't recognize, a red triangle inside a circle with no text. After this, official documents end, not with conclusions but with silence. For nearly 30 years, the train's absence was a ghost file in government archives, referred to only in passing, if at all. Even the families of the convoy's personnel were issued plausible reassignment letters, claims that their loved ones were relocated overseas or absorbed into classified projects. Many of these families reported receiving monthly government stipends with a clause forbidding inquiry or media engagement. A few pushed back. One filed a lawsuit in 1978. It was dismissed in the interest of national security. There are no photographs of the train's departure, only a loading manifest partially retrieved from a microfiche reel buried in the National Archives. It lists standard military freight, MREs, medical crates, climate-controlled cargo units. But the last item is anomalous. Special Containment Vault 6B, authorized personnel only. No further description, no weight, no dimension. The vault, according to a now-deceased whistleblower from Fort Detrick, was rumored to be part of a mid-century effort to recover and relocate non-biological intelligence discovered in Alaska in 1950. He claimed it had a resonance field, was not designed by human engineers and was not to be exposed to rapid motion or changing elevation. Transporting it by train was considered risky. He died of cardiac arrest hours after giving that interview to a private researcher. His notes, written in cipher, were later published online and just as quickly taken down. If you follow the rail line through the valleys north of Big Sky Country, you'll eventually come to where the tracks bend unnaturally. A portion of the steel is twisted, melted, as if subjected to extreme heat, yet there's no record of any fire, no corrosion, no warping from pressure, just a frozen, unexplainable curve in the path, as though the metal was trying to resist what came next. Even now, hikers and hunters in those woods speak of strange echoes, of flickering shadows that don't align with the sun. A few claim to have found artifacts, military buttons, shattered glass insulators, a rusted door handle with the number 107 barely legible under years of grime. One man brought that handle to a pawn shop in Bozeman. The shop burned down 2 nights later. The fire report lists cause unknown. The man was never seen again. Some things, it seems, are not meant to be found. There is a photograph. A single grainy Polaroid discovered in 1972 inside a hollowed-out radio console at a junkyard auction in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The photo, now water-damaged and barely legible, appears to show a military flat car half submerged in a wooded ravine. The angle is skewed, almost accidental, and the frame catches only part of the vehicle. But on the edge of the image, someone scrawled in faded blue ink, PX 107, still humming, no birds. The photo passed through several hands before disappearing into a private collection. Only a scanned copy remains, shared in a fringe newsletter about government black projects. Skeptics call it a hoax. But those who've worked in military intelligence whisper that the configuration of the car, its coupling, the reinforced ribbing, the ventless design, matches a unique type of transport used during the 1950s for sensitive materials requiring atmospheric isolation. In 1998, a Freedom of Information Act request was submitted by an investigative journalist named Laura Klein. Her focus was a series of anomalies tied to U.S. rail operations during the early Cold War era. The request returned hundreds of unrelated documents, but buried within them was a misfiled 1953 military engineering memo. It references a temporary rail divergence authorized without explanation by the Office of Strategic Projects. Coordinates place this divergence near an unlisted branch line cutting through the northern edge of the Shoshone National Forest. There is no record of who approved it, no blueprint, no removal order. The tracks have since been overgrown and are absent from all contemporary mapping services. A man named Hugh Delaney, a former USGS cartographer, claimed he once mapped that area in 1964. He remembered the track, specifically that it seemed to vanish into a hill that should have had no tunnel. When he returned to finalize the survey, the line was gone. Not dismantled, he said, just gone, like it had never been there. He reported this to his supervisor. 2 weeks later, his employment was terminated due to professional inconsistencies. More pieces began to surface in obscure places. In 2007, a retired Army colonel anonymously submitted a sealed envelope to a university archive in Oregon. It contained a typed log, unsigned, undated, apparently written by a communications officer assigned to a shadow detail following PX 107. The entries are erratic, but certain lines stand out. August 12th. The air around the lead car was vibrating at 3:12 a.m. I could feel it in my teeth. August 13th. The train is still moving, but the sky changed. Not cloudy, wrong stars. August 14th. The engineer said he saw something step across the track ahead. No details. He won't speak anymore. The document was dismissed by university archivists as a creative writing hoax. It now resides in a restricted access folder labeled Speculative Ephemera, and yet, 2 years after its deposit, the university's entire West Wing experienced an electrical fire of unknown origin. The fire department later stated that the breaker box had melted from within. By 2015, amateur investigators began to gather fragments, photographs, maps, testimonies into a digital dossier. They called themselves the PX Group. Operating through encrypted forums, they conducted field expeditions into suspected locations. One such location was a depression deep in the Bighorn Mountains. There, they claimed, was a magnetic dead zone, roughly 400 meters wide, where compasses spun erratically and drones lost signal. Soil samples showed elevated levels of manganese and a compound not cataloged in any known chemical database. Of the 5-person team that visited that site, only 3 returned. One refused to speak again, entering a catatonic state upon arrival at a hospital in Casper. Another, under an alias, published a series of cryptic blog posts about time folds and non-Euclidean transit mechanics. The posts were removed within days and the account was deleted. The last, a woman using the name Erin L., uploaded a single video clip to a secure drive. The footage, filmed at night, shows a rust-colored train axle half buried in the dirt. A low hum can be heard, constant, mechanical, with no visible source. In the final 10 seconds of the video, Erin turns the camera to face the tree line. There is movement, tall, dark shapes sliding between trees, then static. The file ends abruptly. Her current whereabouts are unknown. Skeptics argue that this is a case of Cold War hysteria meeting internet-fueled myth. They point to the lack of physical proof, the absence of military confirmation, the convenient disappearances. But that argument fails to account for the pattern, the recurring names, the erased maps, the sealed tunnels, the strange symbols carved into tree bark near suspected routes. A linguist from MIT once examined those symbols, found on a tree stump near the Powder River Pass. She identified them as belonging to no known alphabet but noted similarities to both Linear A and Navajo code syllables. Her report was never published. Her office was later broken into. Nothing was taken, except for that single research file. Even more unsettling is the correlation between PX-107 and a sharp increase in reported missing time incidents from 1953 through 1955. Individuals across the Northwest, truckers, hikers, radar technicians, reported losing hours with no explanation. Some returned with strange scars or altered memories. One man, an air traffic controller in Missoula, insisted he watched a freight convoy loop the same stretch of track 7 times in one night, each time missing a car. When he reported it, he was institutionalized. The military maintained silence. Requests for comment go unanswered. The few surviving relatives of those on the original train have stopped speaking to the press. One woman, daughter of a sergeant believed to be aboard, simply said, "We were told to forget, so we forgot. But the land remembers." And perhaps that's where the real story lives, not in the files or the footage, but in the land itself, in the way dogs growl at empty air near the old rail beds, in the frost that clings too long to the soil at certain mile markers, in the vibrations felt through the soles of your feet, even when the ground seems still. Something passed through Montana in 1953, something that wasn't supposed to, something the world wasn't ready for. And whatever PX-107 was carrying, it may still be out there, or maybe it never left. The official doctrine of the U.S. military during the early Cold War years relied on a system of controlled ambiguity. Entire programs were compartmentalized, layered beneath false designations, front organizations, and fictitious mission statements. Within this labyrinth, PX-107 vanished not just physically, but bureaucratically. Internal memos referenced it without naming it. Orders were given but not recorded. Entire branches were informed only on a need-to-know basis, and very few, if any, truly needed to know. In 1954, an audit conducted by the General Accounting Office flagged an inconsistency in Defense Department transport logs. A multi-ton rail cargo shipment marked Priority Red and authorized under Top Clearance 38 Delta was neither checked in nor confirmed at any known destination. The accompanying convoy personnel, 27 soldiers and 2 civilian scientists, were not listed as discharged, reassigned, or deceased. The file was labeled an anomalous accounting error and sealed under Executive Order 10501. It was never followed up. But what precisely was aboard that train? A former Oak Ridge technician who requested anonymity, even in death through a legal affidavit, suggested that PX-107 may have been carrying remnants from Project Ice Vault, a 1950 Arctic excavation effort that uncovered what were described as pre-human metallic constructs embedded deep within glacial rock. The constructs were allegedly moved via specialized containers designed to shield electromagnetic emissions. According to this technician, one crate had been tampered with. The interior revealed an object that pulsed in irregular intervals, caused nausea within a 30-foot radius, and disrupted analog timepieces. There is no official record of Project Ice Vault. The only known trace is a brief mention in a redacted 1951 Air Force Arctic Logistics memo, which refers to transport difficulties regarding non-terrestrial finds, containment insufficient for prolonged exposure. The same memo also contains a curious handwritten note in the margin. Do not route through populated corridors, CPX 107 for Y. By the 1960s, the Cold War had created enough chaos to drown dozens of unresolved cases. PX-107 became folklore among certain military transport circles, spoken of only in hushed tones and always with a touch of gallows humor. Take your boots off on 107, one sergeant reportedly told a new recruit. You might walk back in someone else's. But every myth leaves a fingerprint, and in this case, it emerged in the form of magnetic disturbances, subtle, localized, and persistent. In 1967, the National Geomagnetic Survey recorded an anomaly near the Montana-Wyoming border. A stretch of land measuring approximately 2 miles exhibited field irregularities inconsistent with known geological activity. The disturbance behaved like a magnetic echo, pulsing every 7.6 hours with minor shifts in orientation. When a team was dispatched to study the site, their instruments failed within minutes. Photographic equipment jammed. Even analog compasses became useless. One geologist described a sensation of slipping, like the ground beneath him wasn't fully anchored to space. The official report was inconclusive. The area was later declared ecologically sensitive and sealed off for wildlife conservation. But perhaps the strangest evidence tied to PX-107 came not from a military archive or remote forest, but from a psychiatric hospital in Boulder, Colorado. In 1974, a patient named Grant Withers was admitted after being found wandering near a rail junction, dehydrated and delirious. He wore a U.S. Army-issue coat dated 1953, though it showed no signs of aging. He carried a journal filled with detailed sketches of machinery, train components, and incomprehensible equations. He spoke of echo trains and a gate beneath the tunnel. What made his case unique was his identity. Fingerprints matched those of Corporal Grant L. Withers, listed as KIA in Korea in 1952. But Withers was not a fabrication. A photograph taken at the hospital shows a middle-aged man, emaciated but lucid, matching the original ID. When military personnel arrived to retrieve him, he reportedly screamed, "You can't send me back. It only opens one way." The hospital filed an incident report. The file vanished 3 weeks later. So did Withers. Cases like these might be dismissed as fringe phenomena, isolated, explainable, but they multiply. A retired CB radio enthusiast from North Dakota reported intercepting a continuous loop transmission on Channel 19 in 1982, repeating the phrase, "PX-107, passenger manifest incomplete, containment breached." He was ridiculed until others began hearing it too. The frequency was inconsistent, often appearing for less than an hour, always around the same dates in mid-August. There is also the matter of the grain manifest anomaly. In 1988, a private contractor hired to digitize old railroad records uncovered a manifest from August 1953. It listed PX-107 among a standard list of grain freights, except the PX-107 line item included none of the required checkboxes, destinations, or tonnage. It simply read, "Transport ends in null." No known code used the term null at the time. When he flagged it to his supervisor, he was told the document didn't exist. He kept a copy. 2 years later, he died in a vehicular collision under circumstances ruled accidental, though his brakes had been newly replaced and his vehicle showed signs of external tampering. Null, an absence, a void. It's a term that appears again in a final chilling entry recovered from a 1953 train inspector's field notebook. The note, dated 3 days after the disappearance, was written in pencil on torn paper. PX-107 not derailed, not delayed, just not. That page was the last in the book. The rest had been torn out. No one knows where they are, but one thing remains certain. For every lead that closes, another opens, into darker territory. The kind of territory where railroads vanish, and with them, the fragile comfort of certainty. In early 1993, a maintenance crew with Burlington Northern Railroad was dispatched to inspect a rarely used siding outside of Thermopolis, Wyoming. The report they submitted, brief, technical, and devoid of speculation, mentions a severe subsidence event near a segment of track that hadn't been in operation since the late 1950s. The crew encountered a shallow sinkhole filled with debris, rusted rail segments, melted coupling hardware, scorched timber. But at the edge of the pit, partially unearthed, they found what appeared to be a crushed military locker. Inside were water-damaged papers, 2 sealed vials of unknown clear fluid, and a scrap of olive-drab cloth marked with a stenciled alphanumeric, PX 10711C. The items were handed off to a military liaison that arrived within 3 hours, well before any official notice could have reached local command. The area was quarantined and listed under geological hazard investigation. The crew received confidentiality agreements and were rotated to distant assignments within a month. One of them, Alan Rourke, spoke to a regional newspaper under condition of anonymity. He described the moment they cracked the locker open. It smelled like hot copper and something, rotten. The papers inside weren't army forms, not standard, symbols everywhere. Some looked like cogs, others like spines or antennas. And the fluid, it moved like it was alive, not bubbling, shifting. Rourke died of a stroke in 1994. He was 42. The contents of the locker were never cataloged in public record. However, one photograph taken before removal shows a page with an odd diagram, a rail car viewed from above, surrounded by concentric rings, each marked with notations in multiple languages: Russian, Hebrew, what appears to be ancient Greek, and a fourth, unidentified script resembling none currently known. The central caption reads, "Enclosure must remain unbroken in motion. Decay starts with stillness." Stillness. It's a recurring motif in the PX-107 mystery. Multiple independent sources, survivors, intercepted transmissions, fragments of logs, speak of time distortion tied to stillness. A theory, now whispered among certain physicists working in fringe fields, suggests PX-107 wasn't simply carrying something dangerous. It was carrying something reactive to temporal inertia. When the train slowed or stopped, it became visible to something else, something outside. This interpretation gained traction in 1997 when a leaked NSA training video, meant for internal review, surfaced briefly on a darknet FTP mirror. In it, a narrator calmly describes priority black events, listing PX-107 alongside terms like Stanford Deep Fold and Project Velvet Mirror. The narrator explains that temporal friction may cause asset contamination and recommends avoidance of known breach geometries. At the 12-minute mark, there is a brief cutaway, grainy footage of what appears to be a distorted railcar flickering between two locations. One frame captures desert terrain. Another, moments later, shows dense snow-covered woods. The transition is instant, jarring. The narrator's tone never changes. The footage was swiftly removed. The NSA denied its existence, but mirrored fragments have survived in private collections. One physics professor at the University of Chicago reviewed a copy. He allegedly remarked, "Whatever PX-107 was caught in, it wasn't just a place, it was a state." Other reports complicate the narrative. A retired Air Force engineer named Calvin Estrada gave a deathbed confession in 2005. His testimony, recorded by his niece, alleges that PX-107 was outfitted with a prototype event core. He described it as a spherical chamber housed within the third-to-last rail car, fed by a stabilizer matrix of unknown origin. He didn't understand its function, only that it required continuous motion to stay in phase. Estrada claims the technology was not American in origin, nor Soviet. It was found, and we tried to harness it. We put it on tracks and prayed. His niece attempted to publish the recording. Her computer was hacked 2 weeks later. The audio vanished. She abandoned the project and has since refused interviews. Curiously, in 2008, an unmarked railcar was found deep in a salvage yard outside Butte, Montana. The owner, a recluse named Jonah Pike, claimed he bought it for scrap years earlier, but had never opened it due to a strange fear he couldn't explain. When finally forced to clear the lot due to legal disputes, workers pried open the car's sealed hatch. Inside, nothing but scorched metal and a warped floor grid, as if something impossibly heavy had once rested there. In one corner was a fragment of painted lettering, PX, still visible under layers of rust. By 2010, the case of PX-107 had bled into urban legend, but not without consequence. National park rangers in the Bighorn region began reporting inexplicable compass failures and time loss incidents. Hikers who emerged hours off schedule, digital watches reset, memory gaps. One park visitor filed a lawsuit against the Department of the Interior claiming he'd lost 2 days after passing near a fenced-off track remnant. The case was dismissed. Even more disturbing is the 2013 case of Dr. Leon Burgess, a mathematician specializing in topology. After years of studying railway anomalies and spatial distortions, Burgess presented a sealed report to DARPA titled Vehicular Transit Through Irregular Geometries. 2 months later, he vanished from his home. Police found no signs of struggle. His basement lab, however, contained a model railroad with a repeating loop labeled 107. The loop was wired to an array of oscilloscopes and analog clocks. All the clocks showed different times. None of them were correct. The only clue left behind was a sticky note on his desk. "We didn't lose the train. We lost where it was allowed to be." Which brings the mystery full circle, not to the moment PX 107 vanished, but to what it disturbed by trying to cross space in a way that space itself refused to allow. A rupture, not of matter, but of permission. Something was being moved that shouldn't have moved. And the punishment wasn't destruction. It was erasure. The concept of erasure is central to understanding the true nature of PX 107's disappearance. Not merely the physical destruction of an object, but the systematic removal of all context around it, its records, its trajectory, its presence in memory. Witnesses silenced, evidence destroyed, questions reframed until asking them becomes an act of paranoia. What remains is only the gap, the place where a thing should be but isn't. In 2015, a former archivist for the Department of Energy, Lorraine Miles, submitted a whistleblower packet to a private investigatory group known as Red Signal. Inside were digital scans of energy use charts spanning the summer of 1953. Amid routine usage patterns across military installations in the western United States, one chart stood out. A spike in power drain in mid-August focused on a disused line of the grid once connected to a now-defunct research station beneath Fort Harrison. The surge, according to Miles, lasted exactly 107 minutes. The final reading showed a sharp drop to absolute zero. Instruments failed. Systems rebooted. No cause was listed. That reading corresponded precisely with the estimated window in which PX 107 passed through the region before vanishing. Miles concluded in her own notes that the train did not simply disappear. It entered a field of cancellation, a zero space. Zero space. A term without scientific precedent, yet it appears again in unrelated documentation. A declassified British intelligence briefing from 1964, obtained through Five Eyes intercepts, references American temporal interference efforts centered on a moving containment breach code-labeled ZSPX. The report suggests British assets were instructed to avoid coordination with U.S. transports along certain geodetic paths, citing instability in event loops. No further elaboration is given, but the fact that Allied nations were quietly adjusting their own military routes suggests a deeper awareness, one that crossed borders, hidden beneath Cold War rhetoric. Even civilian institutions began to take notice, though in fragmented, confused ways. In 1979, the Federal Railroad Administration launched a quiet study into rail sections exhibiting irregular erosion patterns. One such section, near the Wind River Canyon, showed advanced wear inconsistent with local climate or expected traffic. Yet no trains had used the line in over 2 decades. The corrosion formed spiral patterns, oxidized rings along the railheads, evenly spaced and growing in diameter, as if something had burned through from the inside out. Metallurgists were brought in. Their conclusion: the steel bore signs of exposure to high-frequency sonic waves. When asked what might generate such frequencies in a remote canyon, no answer was offered. This pattern repeated across sites believed to be connected to PX 107's last known route. In each location, Elkhorn, Red Lodge, Graycliff, Wapiti, materials behave strangely. Concrete loses density, wood petrifies rapidly, glass fractures with no impact. Locals report static on radios and malfunctioning GPS. And always, without exception, animals avoid the area. There is a pattern of auditory hallucinations too. Residents within 2 miles of these zones have described hearing distant train whistles in the dead of night, long, slow, echoing through terrain where no tracks remain. Some say they hear voices layered beneath the whistle, repeating words that shift between English and other unfamiliar tongues. A few have recorded these sounds. Spectrogram analysis reveals an underlayer of frequency pulses, every recording matching the exact 114.2 MHz signal first intercepted near Elkhorn in 1953. Attempts to trace the origin of these sounds have failed. Equipment malfunctions. Memory becomes unreliable. One amateur researcher who camped for a week near the Crazy Mountains to track the signal disappeared without a trace. His tent was found undisturbed. Inside, his journal ended with one final entry. "It's not the train that moves, it's the track." This idea of mobile infrastructure, of geometry shifting around the object rather than the object moving within geometry, defies classical physics. And yet it is increasingly central to the PX-107 hypothesis, that the train was not simply lost in space or time, but transitioned into a flexible coordinate system no longer bound by our conventional dimensions. Something warped, something bled through. To this end, the 2001 tangent corridor theory proposed by Dr. Wen-Shin Hao may be the closest framework we have. Published quietly in a limited academic journal, Hao's paper outlines the theoretical possibility of semi-stable transit zones formed by continuous velocity through layered gravitational anomalies. According to her model, if an object of sufficient electromagnetic insulation entered one of these zones while in motion, and if a specific frequency threshold was met, within 113.5 to 115.0 MHz, the object might slide laterally across space-time folds without acceleration. It would simply stop being here and begin being elsewhere. Hao never referenced PX-107 by name, but an appendix lists dates corresponding to known anomalies. August 13, 1953, is marked as a peak event. She disappeared during a hiking trip near Glacier National Park in 2002. A private security firm, Sentinel Point, was later contracted to investigate abandoned rail segments in the area. Internal documents leaked in 2017 reveal their field team uncovered signs of unsanctioned trespass, including boot prints matching 1950s military footwear, broken Geiger counters, and what was described as a non-reflective black residue found along a series of rusted spikes. The report concluded that the segment bore characteristics of residual transit stress. What that means is left undefined. Of note, the report's header lists the job as PX-107 Recovery Suppression, Phase 3. That header confirms something long suspected but never proven, that PX-107 is not simply an unsolved case. It is an ongoing one. That somewhere in the guts of the American intelligence machine there remains a program, not to find the train, but to contain the knowledge of its passage, to cauterize the wound it left in space, and to ensure that what entered from the other side never learns how to follow. The final truth about PX-107 may never be known, not because it is hidden, but because it was designed to be unremembered. The disappearance wasn't just a logistical anomaly or a Cold War embarrassment. It was a rupture in consensus reality, an intrusion of a phenomenon that logic could not accommodate, and so logic collapsed inward, erasing what it couldn't process. In the decades since the convoy vanished, patterns have persisted. Reports from retired railroad men in Nebraska, whispers among surviving Korean War veterans, intercepted memos from military contractors long dissolved, all paint a fragmented mosaic of denial, obsession, and fear. PX-107 was not a one-time incident. It was the warning bell, and we've been trying to muffle the echo ever since. In 2020, a private investigator named Daniel Kress compiled over 800 documents, photographs, and interviews into what he called the Null File. He died in a house fire the night before he was to present his findings at a closed-door symposium in Boston. The only salvageable item from his office was a melted hard drive labeled Gate Alignments, PX 107. A forensic lab later recovered a single partial file, a map, overlaid with hundreds of intersecting arcs drawn in red. All curves converged on a central point somewhere deep in the Wind River Range. The word return had been typed next to it. There is no known record of any follow-up. No agency has claimed the map, but hikers report increased military presence in the area, unmarked choppers that hover silently, and new signs warning of unexploded ordnance, despite no history of weapons testing ever occurring there. Every 7 years, like clockwork, there is a spike in missing persons reports within a 300-mile radius of the original PX 107 route. The numbers are small, spread out, never enough to raise alarms, but they're consistent, and if plotted carefully, they trace the outline of the train's original path, like a ghost route still feeding on proximity. The children of those aboard the train, those who remember, those who were too young, speak rarely. But in closed circles, at midnight gatherings in motel conference rooms and on encrypted forums, they share dreams, always the same: a tunnel with no end, tracks that rise into the sky, and a long, low hum that grows louder as they wake. One described a repeated phrase whispered in his sleep, spoken in a voice he didn't recognize but swore was his father's. "We're still moving. Don't stop the engine." In a warehouse in Kansas City, a collector of arcane objects claims to have acquired a segment of rail engraved with the PX 107 designation. He says it was pulled from a farmer's field, unearthed during a flood. The rail emits a low-frequency vibration at dawn and dusk. No measuring equipment can detect it, but those who touch it report the sensation of motion, like riding in a vehicle that never starts or stops. One visitor had a nosebleed after standing near it for more than 2 minutes. Another went missing the following night. The warehouse is now closed to the public. The question isn't where the train went. It's what it took with it, and what may have come back. There are accounts, unverified but eerily consistent, of lights seen on abandoned tracks, boxcars materializing for seconds before flickering out, and strange markings appearing on the backs of signs and inside locked maintenance sheds. Symbols that match no language but share a geometry, spirals within triangles, glyphs that bend in on themselves, fractal loops. In one case, a railroad engineer in Idaho reported an emergency stop after seeing a crossing signal blink where no crossing existed. When he investigated, he found deep grooves in the gravel beside the tracks, as though something massive had passed by without touching the rails. He requested a transfer and retired within the year. We have no framework for PX 107, no taxonomy. It is not a ghost story. It is not science fiction. It is the kind of event that leaves a scar in the structure of things, a black site not of buildings but of memory. What we do know is this: PX 107 departed on August 13, 1953. It passed Big Timber before noon. It was never seen again. No emergency signal, no derailment, no trace of its cargo. And yet, its shadow lingers, not in photographs or manifests, but in the terrain, in frequency bands that no one can explain, and in the silences that follow when the subject is raised in the wrong rooms. Whatever PX 107 was transporting, be it experimental technology, recovered artifacts, or something else entirely, it was never meant to stop. It was designed to move endlessly, to remain in a controlled corridor of velocity. Because stopping, in this case, wasn't rest, it was permission, and so it moved, and still moves, somewhere beneath the ground, or between layers of time, or in the folds of a landscape that no longer aligns with the maps we trust. This is not a story with a conclusion. It is a file that refuses to close, a question that circles back on itself. And if you ever hear a whistle in the night, on tracks long torn up, on ground where no steel should sing, listen closely. You may not hear it again,